Welcome and thank you for joining today's Light Reading webinar.
So hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar called Scaling Policy Deployment, sponsored by Procera Networks and broadcast by Light Reading, UBM Tech Web and United Business Media. My name's Graham Finney. I'm Chief Analyst at Heavy Reading and I'll be moderating today's session as well as presenting some of Heavy Reading's own research in this area. It's an area that we've been following from a research point of view for about 6 years. Through a range of surveys of both network operator plans and vendor product sets. And we're continuing to see dynamic changes in this area, which we're going to discuss with you in a moment. But first, let me introduce our main speaker today, Cam Cullen. Cam, would you like to introduce yourself and your company?
Sure. Thanks, Graham. My name is Cam Cullen. I'm the VP of Global Marketing for Procera Networks. Procera is a leading policy enforcement company. And our solutions are designed to help operators take advantage of the new service capabilities of policy management infrastructures and deliver what we consider to be personalized services to customers.
Okay, thanks Cam and welcome. So let's look at the agenda for today. I'm going to kick things off in a moment by talking through the reasons why policy deployments are scaling up with some evidence from our surveys with operators and some modeling work that we've done. And then I'm going to hand over to Cam, who's going to discuss the central role of personalization and the implications of that in terms of the kind of scaling and complexity that we can expect, as well as some of the solutions to the problems that gives rise to. So I think there'll be plenty for us to chew over, and a reminder, you can ask questions anytime using the questions box, and we should have plenty of time at the end to answer your questions. So let's start with the sort of central issue. We've seen widespread deployment of policy controlling networks, especially over the last 2 years, and especially in mobile networks. So we estimate that around about 2/3 are now in various stages of deploying a policy server like the PCRF in 3GPP. Some of those deployments are relatively mature, but at the same time, they often carry few policy use cases or applications, which means that the load on the policy server is generally reasonably manageable, even with first-generation equipment. Having said that, all the indicators from our research suggest that picture is changing pretty fast, and this slide sets out the key reasons. First of all, policy control is gradually moving to the center stage from a service point of view as operators look to create more complex and user-centric service tiers. And that means, amongst other things, they're using more triggers to make policy decisions based on a whole range of things, from application to URL to real-time congestion to what type of network the user's on. Some cases QoS supported policy, so lots of new ideas coming through, and they are actually beginning to filter into networks, especially the more pioneering providers. That means, or that's contributing to more sessions per users. And there's more sessions because of the number of applications people are running on there, especially on their smartphones. And this is creating more, for example, PDB context and more sessions. Personalization also means more transactional traffic between the policy server on the one hand and the various pieces of equipment that might be connected to it, like policy enforcement devices, charging systems, application servers, subscriber data management systems, and so on. And finally, the transition to LTE, which we're just at the start of. This is also going to increase the load because LTE mandates use of policy as a core means to differentiate amongst applications in an all-IP traffic and service environment. So there's lots of things which are contributing to that scaling up, which makes us pretty confident that we're going to see much larger policy deployments in future. Here's one of the things, which gives us confidence in that regard, and just to amplify on one of the points I made, this slide is taken from a survey we conducted last year, in which the question was, policy tools allow telcos to set subscriber policies based on a wide range of triggers. Which of the following triggers does your company now use or plan to use? And you can see that more than half of the survey base checked yes to 8 of those triggers. So volume of data, subscriber tier, application type, QoS requested, time of day or week, URL, real-time congestion conditions. So the number of triggers is going to grow because I mean, a lot of those triggers are not used today in policy deployments. So they're things that people are thinking about adding. And in fact, when we look at mobile providers specifically, they're even more inclined to use a very wide range of triggers. So that in itself is going to generate more complex and larger scale policy deployments. So if we look at the next slide and look at it from a use case point of view, and again this is taken from that same survey last year. So the median response here for the number of use cases that operators are expected to run on their policy deployments within 3 years was about 20. So that's a lot higher than we see today. Typically, policy deployments today are probably carrying 3 or 4 use cases, sometimes less. But we're hearing of more and more cases where operators are asking for 20 or even more use cases to be implemented right up front in the RFPs that they're issuing. So this is beginning to happen. We're seeing the more pioneering operators in competitive markets beginning to deploy this kind of solution. And the trend that we're showing here was continuing strongly in a similar survey that we did this year, where the average number of use cases expected was even higher than we're showing on this slide. So if we translate that into the load on the policy server, we get something like the picture that we're showing in this slide. Obviously, policy isn't all about transactions per second from a load or complexity point of view, but that's one big part of the story. This slide, or the graphic at the top of this slide, is taken from some work we did with Broadhop, looking at scaling up policy, and in fact I believe that white paper is still available on Broadhop's website if you're interested in more detail. But we estimated the policy load in a network of 10 million subscribers over the course of 3 years, making certain, relatively modest assumptions about the total number of customers, broadband customers on the mobile network, what proportion of them are active at busy hour, which of course grows as more applications are added, and the number of policy use cases. And you can see in the table that this suggested the load would rise from about 2,000 transactions per second at the beginning to 23,000 transactions per second over that 3-year period. And in fact, we did a similar sizing exercise in LTE in which we projected the load rapidly scaling beyond 50,000 transactions per second, even on some relatively modest assumptions about the kind of use cases which we would see. So those kinds of loads are definitely a challenge for vendors, especially for first-generation products, and give rise to some hard thinking about exactly how you're going to deal with those tens of thousands of transactions in the future. So I'm going to leave things on that note and let Cam give us his thoughts on the issues and challenges as he sees them. So Cam, over to you.